Alright, so welcome everyone. So this is my video where I make a recap of a double round in which I had black twice, and I've decided to group these two games together, mainly because they actually look quite similar. In both cases I had an endgame. And I'm sorry because I did not upload these videos. I took a whole day to make them. So basically I'm recording them the same as my game from today, which was round 7. So let's have a look. So for the first of these two games, I was paired against a very young opponent who was only 10 years old. And I saw that he always plays d4, knight f3, c4, and e3 in that order, and so that made it pretty easy for me to prepare. So I played this kind of slow Slav. Knight h4 is the only actual try to get an advantage. Bishop g6, queen b3, queen b6. We are never afraid of c4, c5. Because in the analogous London line, white would have bishop f4 to hit the queen, which would then have to hide on c8. But here, since the pawn is already on e3, bishop f4 is not possible. In any case, my opponent he took on b6, takes. He took on g6, h takes, and he took on d5. And if I don't want to have these ugly double pawns on the b file after this, I have to take with the e-pawn. So far so good. White has the bishop pair, which is basically what makes up most of his advantage, and black has double pawns, two sets of double pawns actually. But I have a couple of nice things too. So first of all, this bishop is buried. It's a very bad looking bishop, and I have two very nice open files for my rooks. So my opponent played bishop d3, and I replied with bishop d6, which was based on a miscalculation. So basically, of course, white cannot castle because then bishop h2. So let's show it. Bishop h2, bishop here, and basically we have one pawn already. So white cannot castle, but basically after the game, which is bishop d2. This is not possible to win a pawn because of g3, and the bishop is going to get trapped. But bishop takes is also not possible because also g3, and the bishop will not be able to get out, and it is pinned to the rook. So basically bishop d6 is kind of a dud. I mean, this is the right square for the bishop, but I think knight bd7 would have been a more accurate move to start with, because the bishop might still go to b4 at some point, all that kind of stuff. Alright, so bishop d6, bishop d2, knight bd7, and my opponent played h3. Now this sort of strongly dissuades castling, because whenever I castles, he's planning to go g4. And now suddenly white is in business, right? Like, okay, not yet this. Let's say simply f3, and h4, h5 is coming. The king can go to f2 or to e2, or even castle kingside. I mean, basically white has a pleasant space advantage, and g4 certainly doesn't hurt. So I played b5 in the game. So g4 is, but as long as the rook is still on h8, g4 will simply be met by knight takes g4 when the rook will be pinned. All right, and castling is still completely impossible because as soon as he castles, he still cannot play g4, because then I will have rook takes h3. So here during the game, I was thinking a bit about g5. I also thought for a while that he might try this, in which case g5 is a fun move, exploiting the pin and basically gaining a lot of activity. But so h3 was precise from him, and here I was still thinking about going for this, and I calculated the following line: take, bishop, knight here to take the bishop, to attack the bishop, and g4, which is I mean, definitely very fun to play, right? Like the bishop is close to getting captured, and probably this is what black should do, but this is starting to get ugly. So I calculated this during the game, but I decided that it wasn't worth it. And also, let's say king e2, g4, h4. What is my pawn doing on g4? It seems that I'm really trying to lose it. At some point, it can get attacked. It can get attacked this way. I mean, basically, this pawn is just a weakness. Rather than what it is currently on g6, which is basically something that helps me cover the light squares. Alright, so after h3 I had to decide on a move to play, and I settled for b5, which kind of invites white to play a4, and white is not yet ready for a4 in my opinion. But so let's have a look. He played a3. So if he goes a4, I can simply take it, and basically here, since these two squares are controlled by my knight, the knights kind of cancel each other out, and black is ready to go king e7 and rook a8, and white will probably do the same, right? King e7, king e2, rook a8. I mean, right now rook a1 is not possible because of b5, but let's say b3, b5, knight a2. This is a completely normal routine position in which not much is necessarily happening. Perhaps black has a slight pull, and definitely white has not managed to pose any problems, right? The bishop on d3 is kind of passive, the bishop on d2 as well. It feels a bit more like black is the one actually making the moves. So a4 is not kind of possible yet. So he played b3. And now after a4, he will simply recapture with the pawn and keep on pushing. So at this point, I wanted to dissuade a4. I played bishop a3. This threatens, so basically if he makes a random stupid move, right? This threatens bishop here, rook e1, and I can grab the pawn on a2. This would be close to winning. After the game, Sébastien Mazet suggested, so my coach Sébastien Mazet suggested this and knight a4, and I don't. So during the game, I only calculated what happens after b5 and knight here, and let's say rook a3 or something like this. And I calculated that I was not in time to pose any problems with this pawn, because for instance, bishop e2, king g8, knight d3, the b pawn is already falling. Although, now that I look at it, I see that a2 is falling as well. But so in any case, yes, I was not particularly happy about the whole b4 situation. So I played bishop a3, which basically completely prevents a4 and introduces the threat of bishop b2. He played rook b1, ostensibly to prevent this whole thing, but also, as I noticed, he has a plan of playing b4. So, for instance, if I have a lapse of concentration and I castle, b4 traps the bishop. And after something like rook e8, rook b3, the bishop is going to get captured and white is winning. So after rook b1, I played bishop here, which still discourages a4. So in this particular position, I assume I have rook a3, but probably even simpler is simply to castle and enjoy life. Probably white is slightly better here, but I think it's not too nothing much. All right. At any rate, here my opponent played king e2, which signals his intention of bringing the other rook in somehow. And after rook b2, so after bishop b4, I am threatening to take here and to take on a2, and so my opponent played rook b2, and I played the bishop back to a3, and I was half expecting the rook to come back and forth like this, and for us to make a draw like this. But he put the rook on c2, and now the threat of b4 has vanished, and the threat of since the rook is no longer the b file, he can no longer play a4, and after the whole a4 threat, he no longer has a rook on the b file to take on b7. So I put the bishop back to b4. Now that I look at it, I don't think this was a forced move because white is no longer threatening b4. Although there are some things to be aware of, like for example, if I play like a random move, let's say g5, bishop b5 takes and knight b5 is threatening both this, and the bishop cannot come back to defend, and probably king d8 would be forced at this point, but this is already a proof that white is black is uncomfortable. I calculated during the game king e7, knight a3, and bishop b4, which is winning the rook and the game. So I have to be careful not to fall for traps like this. I played bishop b4, which I thought was still nice. King e2. And now that the rook is going to come to the queen side, I have to get this rook into the game somehow, and I castled. Of course, he met it with g4. This is the punishment for castling, and I played rook e8. And basically, what I want is at some point I want to take and put a knight on the e4 square and just simply enjoy life, right? It would be backed by the rook. It's a nice outpost. So he played the rook to b1, and now he is threatening a4 again because he's going to take on c7, and he's also, after taking on b7, he will also be ready to take on c6. So at this point, I calculated a bit and I played knight f8 with exactly the idea that occurred in the game. So we'll see it in a minute. a4, take, rook takes b7, and knight e6. And during the game, when I played knight f8, I was anticipating that after a4, that here he would take back with the rook, and that we would get this position. So my idea is to exploit the pin on this square like this, and I can meet rook takes c6 with knight e6, both threatening knight e8, and also check picking the knight back up when white would be close to losing, or at least in a difficult position. So, but my opponent played bishop takes, and after the whole taking series, I am again threatening to capture on d4, right? And I am also threatening to capture with the rook takes and take, and to take the rook here. But that being said, my opponent simply played. And I am also threatening knight f4. That might pick up this pawn and might pick up the bishop pair, or like deny him the bishop pair. And so, of course, he saw all of this, and he played the calm and collected king h1. Now, for a while, I was very tempted to go and play c4, until I noticed that bishop b5 is simply a killer move, and I don't even have a check to escape this with tempo, because bishop takes a1. So in order to still play c5 and to guard against bishop b5, I played rook a3, which is kind of an annoying move for white to face, because I am pinning the bishop on c3 to its counterpart on d3, and basically the rook is also kind of tied to the bishop. So he took care of that situation immediately by going bishop e2, and in this position I was hesitating. So I noticed at this point in the game that I had often been reacting to whatever the drawbacks of his moves had been. So for instance, whenever he played b3, he just vacated liberated the a3 square, and so I go to a3. Here he put the rook on b2, I go back to a3. I mean, somehow all of my moves naturally react to his. And I was considering knight e4 because he just lost control over the e4 square. And I was very close to playing knight e4, but I noticed that... so for me there were two possible responses, because this bishop is attacked after all. Bishop b4 is probably not a good move, and I probably can meet it very simply by playing rook here. And I am not sure whether I can make c5 work. I don't remember it now. My guess is I cannot make it work, but I have rook c8, c6, there's no rook a6. That's interesting. For some reason, the only thing I remember is that this was not good for black. I think rook b1 was kind of annoying, but I don't remember for what reason. Oh, I have rook b2. That must be it. All right. So rook b2 is a very annoying move. Basically, here I can go back, and he cannot block the check because the bishop is pinned. But after knight e4, bishop b4 was not a big worry for me. The big worry was bishop b2, when suddenly the rook kind of has no good squares. I'm dropping c6 because I cannot go to a6. If I go to b2, I mean simply rook takes e6, and what have I achieved, right? I am kind of completely locked out of my own position, and basically I am like, the whole game is miserable at this point. So yeah, so seeing this, I decided to play c5. I mean, after all, I played all of this in order to do this pawn trust. And he reacted with bishop b2, which is logical given how it is a move in the other line as well. And I went back and protected c5. And here he took, and I had some calculation, and I calculated rook takes c5, rook takes c5 takes, and let's say rook takes b5, rook b5 simply, and let's say knight e4 like this. I mean, in that case, there's many potential ways for black to win a pawn, for white to win a pawn. I think this is one of the cleanest ones. G5, bishop takes. Actually here it's black that's winning a pawn. I mean, in any case, these knights are a bit unstable. F3 is not possible right away because there's a fork on G3, but basically it feels like the pawn on D5 should drop at some point later on in the game. And this is the move. Bishop takes, and now G5. and rook takes d5, and this is bad news, right? There's no particular reason why black should hold this. With the pawn on h7, there might be a discussion. I think with the pawn on g6, it's hard. All right. So seeing this, that this whole position was kind of unstable, I did not see that white is winning a pawn, but I guess that the pawn on d5 might be a bit loose. I decided to take on c5 with the knight, and I thought it had the added benefit of hitting the rook on b7. I might get one of these two knights to d4, and to e4, and life is good, you know. And then he played rook to b5, and I realized that I was losing, because basically he forces the trade of rooks, and my rook is attacked and my knight is attacked, and if I play knight d7 to guard against both of them, then simply bishop f6. So this is a very, very bad situation. If I take like this, white is simply up a bishop, and if I take like this, like even just f4 is more than enough, and white is probably going to steamroll black, and this pawn is going to fall in the long term. Like white can bring the king to d4 and pressure this pawn. There's simply no way that I'm going to hold this position. So in the game, I decided to go for rook. Seeing this, I decided to go for rook c8. I had a long think about what would be my best chance at a draw. So from afar, I had only seen bishop d4, threatening the rook. The rook cannot move because it is pinned to the. The knight cannot move because it's pinned. Knight e4, f3, and now it looks like the whole position is collapsing, except that I have a final shot to save the game in knight d6. And now bishop c5, a knight here, and it might even be black who's better, because I might also play something like knight a6, for instance. Right, black might still win this endgame actually. Like to be fair, it is equal, but I am definitely not worse. And rook takes c5, take, and knight takes. And again, black is not worse, definitely not worse. So I was hoping, basing all of my hopes on the possibility of this move knight d6. And then he played f3, and I realized, he simply inverted the move order, and there will be no knight e4, and that's simply the end of the game. So I did a few more moves. I played rook to c7. He played. So now if he plays bishop d4, I can play knight e6, and I'm saving my rook, right? Take, and let's say bishop c6. And yeah, I am not lost yet. Let's say bishop here. The knight probably has to move. Let's say here, take. This might be a holdable endgame. I don't know how holdable it is, but you know, black has chances. But he was precise and accurate, and he played bishop here. And if I go back to c8, now he plays bishop d4, and there is no way to further guard the knight. Rook b7 is never an option. And so in the game I played rook to e7, take, rook takes here, and if he takes on d5 in this position, I can take on f3, and after the king comes to f2, this is starting to get close to something that looks like counterplay. Or not necessarily counterplay, but a position that is tough to win. Basically, if I can trade all of the pawns, it will be a draw. if I can trade rooks and trade off this pawn as well, this will be a draw because the bishop is on the wrong color diagonal relative to the promotion square. So I have some definite chances to actually draw this game. In the end, I didn't manage, but you know, there might be something. Of course, he didn't want to allow this, so he played king f2, and I played d4, rook d5, and bishop and rook e5. And after the trade, my ambition is to trade off all of my 4 pawns versus these 2 pawns by white. And I got quite close, but I didn't manage in the end. King e2, f5, bishop d3, and I calculated. So I think he should have played g5 rather than n, and simply to get a pawn on a dark square, right? f5, g5. Basically, black can resign at this point. There is absolutely no reason to play on. The pawn will survive. He can put a pawn on h4. He will stop the pawns. He will bring the king somehow to the king side, and he will smash through. But f5, bishop d3, and I played king g7. Takes, king f6, king g5. I am controlling both dark squares, so black forces king d3 from white's perspective. And after king here, for instance, if white plays only one move which is slightly inaccurate, then e4 is an instant draw, because now these pawns get traded. Take, and I don't care about this pawn. He might play anything. I will simply go back and run towards h8. I mean, even king here. Now, and once black reaches h8, this is a complete draw. So it is not too late to let the win slip, but my opponent played h4. Now my king cannot go back because all these 3 squares are unavailable. e4. I do manage to win the bishop, and I could win this pawn on h4, but this pawn will be promoting, and in the end I played. We played this. Wait a second. Yes, and now my opponent played h5, and now I resigned. So I think a slightly disappointing game, because it did not feel like I was so far away from a draw, especially at this stage of the game. I feel like I underestimated the power of the 2 bishops in these endgame situations, and apart from that, it is not so easy to say where exactly I went wrong. Perhaps one of these things that I could have done instead of bishop a3, to play for this b4 line and to, let's say, rook e7, and to simply play like double up on the a file, and then play b5 at an opportune moment and go capture on b2. And white is probably not in time. I could check. So the only way to be in time would be to play something like this, right? So rook a7, knight here, rook here, and now this is already white is already trading everything. So yeah, so black is actually more than fine. So yeah, so this might have been the way to press for an advantage, and it seems that the win, not the win, but like the equality slowly slipped away from my fingers and sort of never came back. So definitely an excellent performance by my opponent, and my only loss in the tournament so far. But somehow I was, after the game I felt fine, and I was interested in what would come up in the next round. So let's have a look. So I noticed that my opponent played this weird knight bd2 line compared to the classical knight c3, which is significantly more popular. So knight d2, And I had a little bit of time to prepare, and with a very nice help of Laurent Fressinet. And I prepared bishop f5, knight h4, bishop e4. And his advice was that the white's only possible trap in this opening is bishop b6, queen b3, queen b6, and now queen h3, threatening queen c8. And whenever e6 is played, you can actually take on g6. The rook is pinned, and f takes simply loses to queen takes e6, which is a very nice opening trap. But if you know about it in advance, you can prepare for it. So bishop e4, queen b3, and now at the chessboard I saw queen b6, queen h3. Now I should not allow queen c8, and I don't really want to put the knight on d7 because of the well-known Rubinstein exchange, which is probably not a big factor in this position, but I wanted to keep the option to get the knight to c6. And after queen h3, e6, f3, suddenly my bishop cannot come back to g6 because of knight takes g6, which is the exact same trap, simply with an added f3 for white. And this means that the only move for black would be to play bishop c2, and the bishop the bishop has no more squares after c2. It might be able to come to a4, but here it would get trapped. So I was feeling sort of uneasy at the prospect of putting my bishop on c2, and so I decided instead of doing this, to go for another line that I had seen in passing mentioned by the computer, which was knight bd7, with the idea queen takes b7 and e5, and basically just blast open the center, develop as quickly as possible, and just see where that leads. And the computer actually gives this pawn sacrifice its actual seal of approval, so why not play it? So my opponent was a bit surprised by e5, and he played f3. So here I only knew that the only thing I knew before playing knight bd7 was that a very low depth of Stockfish had evaluated to like minus 0.3 or minus 0.4. So I knew that black was all right and probably even slightly better. But I had no idea what the concrete moves were in this position. So he forced me to play a lot of accurate moves. So f3, the only sensible move that I can play is to play bishop g6. C takes d5. My only sensible move is to take with the c pawn. If I take knight takes d5, then simply e4, and now my bishop is kind of buried by these pawns on the light squares. And this knight will have a bright future on either on e3 or on f4, and my bishop is just pure shit. So, having gone for knight bd7, I am now forced to recapture with this pawn. He played e4. It's clear that again these pawns cannot be tolerated if the bishop is to live. So I took. He played knight takes g6. Of course, I will not take this with the f pawn. He played bishop c4. If I play anything other than e6, I am simply getting mated in one move on f7. So e6 is forced, and now my opponent took back, and so by a series of forced moves, starting with knight d7, I have basically ended up in this position. And so if I trust the computer that knight d7 was correct, I must trust in this particular position, which is not easy for me to do, because basically white has a nice center and the bishop pair, and when he castles he has an open file for the rook, and my natural move bishop d6 is simply met with e5, and which is a simple fork. In addition to this, the pawn on b7 is still hanging, and so at the board I was kind of trying to figure out why this position would be playable for black. And so I decided to trade queens. I am kind of hitting b3 and d4, and it's playing something like queen d3 or queen e3 kind of feels uncomfortable from white's perspective. I think after queen e3 I might even be able to play something slightly funky like knight g4, or something more tricky like knight e5, and I'm just taking the bishop and life is good, right? And after queen d3, probably rook d8 is possible, or probably long castle, but in both cases with the idea that of playing knight e5. So yeah, I thought he would trade queens, which he did. Take. He did not hesitate to give a check, and from afar in this position I wanted to play king d8, and only then I noticed that after white castles, the pawn on f7 will be very weak, and in this position the only thing that is left for this pawn to drop is for white to play e5, and then my knight moves and the pawn drops on f7, and then suddenly all of these three pawns are weak and will get picked off, and you know that's how you lose chess games. So I decided to, and also knight bd7 is not really practical because of e5, and somehow, yeah, knight fd7 felt more like a natural move. So he played d5 anyway. I played a6, which is the natural way to tell the bishop to go screw itself. Bishop d3, knight d5, which I thought was nice. Knight e4. He's trying to exploit the square on d6, and he's also preparing to castle and to play knight g5 and to attack the f7s, the pawn on f7. Alright, so in this position I played... What did I play? I played f6. I don't remember... Oh, yes. What I was thinking about in this position was if he castles, I could play... I might play knight takes d5, knight takes e5, bishop c5, and long castle, and I was trying to make an attack on h2 work, like possibly by starting with a doubling of the rooks on the h-file, or even the more barbaric rook takes and castles, followed by rook to h8. But the king always manages to escape to the g3 square, and the knight on d5 is completely useless for the fight for the g3 square, and stopping the king from running to g3 with bishop h2 doesn't work because simply rook takes h2. So this was kind of funny to calculate, but of course not surprising that this didn't work. Knight e4, and I played f6. Laurent Fraissinet pointed out after the game that I might be able to play knight b4 and knight c6, and now probably bishop e3 is a thing, and very likely knight b6 to knight d5 or rook d8, and black is definitely not worse and doing fine. Black is also threatening knight c4 to kind of force the bishop back. So white is slowly starting to run out of active or useful moves. I'm not sure whether black is better yet, but definitely this position is very comfortable to play. But during the game, I only saw knight b4, bishop g1, and I failed to spot knight c6. I think if I had seen knight c6, I would have played it. And I played f6 to get a nice sort of home for my king. He castled, and now king e7 would be met with knight g5, which would be pretty violent. I guess bishop takes g6 is already possible. I am not sure exactly how well this goes, but this looks like a typical brutal move. Probably this doesn't work because after bishop g5 there's still something like knight e7, but this is not a position that you want to find yourself in. And you know, the simple fact that this is all even a thing shows that like, I mean, this is a positional nightmare, right? The bishop is very sad. So so king f6. So right now f6 is attacked. I was hoping during the game that he would be dissuaded from castling because of this threat. But as it turns out, I understood that whenever I take on e5, his plan is to actually go knight g5, and now he's threatening this. He's threatening this. Whenever the knight leaves d5, he will have an additional fork, and you know, the pawn on d4 simply doesn't really matter. I can also go for this, and you know, like, why would I get into that kind of a mess, right? Like there's no reason for me to play that kind of chess. So I didn't take on e5. Instead, I told myself I wanted to simply be solid, and my aim was to play simply king f7 in that kind of position if it comes to it. He played knight c3, and I realized that he might want to take on d5 and get a passed e-pawn on e6. And for this reason, furthermore, he's also threatening this. And when this happens, he can take, and play e6 and bishop g6, and bishop f5 is really bad, like very bad news, and my pieces are bad. Like whenever the king is the most advanced piece on that you have, you know, you have done something wrong. Bishop g6, king d6, bishop f4, king on the c. Arrows are difficult. King on the c file and rook c1 is a recipe for disaster. So I wanted to avoid this, and so I played knight f8, which both guards this square on the pawn on g6, but also, if he takes on d5, it allows me to potentially set up a small kind of fortress-like structure, which is not so easy for white to penetrate. So after knight f8, he played bishop d2. I played rook h4 to attack the weakness on d4 and exploit the fact that because of my knight on d5, the bishop cannot really come to e3. This prompted him to take and to play bishop c3. So now the d4 pawn is guarded, and I went king f7. Right now I have managed to safely get my king to this like small cabin made by the pawns. Rook e1, rook e8. So rook d8. So rook d8 was based on the variation f5, g3, bishop e2, bishop f3, and rook here, and bishop takes d5, and I have lost a pawn, and then rook takes here, and this is very likely winning for white. So I did not like the look of this variation because d8 because d5 would be hanging. I simply played rook to d8, and now this whole variation again would yield something like this. And now I have a rook on d1 to take, and there are no checks here. So I would be perfectly fine with this. Knight e6 here is my move, but even f5 is possible, and the pawn here is guarded. The knight will sit very nicely on the d6 square, on the e6 square, and I'm not even sure that black is worse at this point. All right, he played rook e2, which I thought was not subtle. So if I make a random move like, let's say, rook g4, his idea is to attack me like this, and whenever I play something like rook d6 to defend, he has bishop here. He can take me. This is kind of bad all the way. So I played f5. He played g3 to try to kick my rook away. I put the rook on g4, which I agree is a bit provocative. I was afraid that if the rook goes far away, goes all the way back home, then g4 would kind of hurt me. I cannot advance the pawn, but I also cannot keep it on g4. I mean on f5. This is really close to mate. So this is not something that I would like to play. So yeah, so I kept the rook on g4 in order to control his potential attack of this pawn. He played king g2, knight e6, and h3. And now I can sacrifice an exchange. There was another potential exchange sacrifice that I might have played in the game, which was after g3. Yes, bishop e3, bishop f3. No, wait a second. This is not the one. Yes, I think this is the one. No, wait a second. Yes, if now e6 and rook e2, I can simply play rook e4 and pawn takes, and no, this was not the one that I saw. The one that I saw, I had the opportunity to play knight f4, so it was before g3. So yes, so in this position, if e6, rook e2, rook e4, I have the option to play knight f4 and knight d5. The d4 pawn is under attack. I have the option to play knight f5, knight g3. The bishop might get active this way. The rook can blockade. This seems like a very easy exchange sacrifice to play in practice. And I was very happy with it. So this is a slightly worse exchange sacrifice because white's rooks can still get active, but it seems that not so much. So he played rook c1. He was starting to get low on time, so I saw a nice trick and I played knight c6. And so bishop a6 threatens this, which would be lights out for black. But after bishop takes a6, I played knight takes e5, and if he takes on b7, I play knight d3, and basically now black is winning, I guess. I mean, let's see, but I cannot imagine. At least I cannot imagine black losing this. Probably this is not winning yet, but like, you know, yeah, this is definitely very nice. So in the game, my opponent played rook e2. I took on a6. He took on e5. I played bishop f6. I calculated rook c7, king f8, and rook e2, guarding the pawn here. Rook g6 is potentially rook c6 is potentially a threat, but I can already guard immediately because there's no back rank mate, and yeah, you know, it seems there's no particular reason to worry as black, but at the same time, I am quite confident that white has the more comfortable version of equality if this is equal. Rook e2, d4, and now if he wants to prevent the pawn from advancing way too much to the d2 square, where the bishop would come to g5 or h6 and guard the pawn on d2, white absolutely needs to put something on a rook on the d3 square. So rook d1, if I play d3, then simply this pawn is going to fall, and then probably the whole game with it. So let's say g5, takes, and yeah, this is bad news, right? Like rook g5, and next move rook a5 is coming, and this pawn is already falling, and then this pawn is going to promote. So basically, I want to keep the pawn on d4. Here I played g5, which was, I don't know how good of a move this was, because I deny my bishop the square on g5, but I get some additional flexibility for my king. He played rook d3, and I replied with rook d6, and I was feeling as though I had set up, so with my 5 pawns to 4, so I have 1 pawn for the exchange, right? And I feel a bit like I've set up a fortress. I don't see exactly, I mean, at least during the game, I didn't really see how white would attack all of my pawns without allowing me some sort of counterplay, which would eventually get things back to equality. Probably white could move the king to d2, and eventually then to d3 and guard the pawn with the king, and then try to get the rooks active somehow. So this might definitely be an option for white to get really active. But it's definitely going to take some time, and in the meanwhile I might get active on the king side. So it's to me it's not clear. I agree, like if anyone is better, I think it is white. I would prefer to play white in this position, but I'm not confident that black is significantly worse. At least this is what I thought during the game. The move rook d6 was one way of saying, prove your advantage. So he played rook c2, and I activated my king all the way to d5. He played rook c7, and suddenly I noticed that I might even have some winning chances. So I played g4, takes, and now he started to hesitate. So he looked at king g4, but then I would simply have king e4, and now, who is attacking who? Right? Like rook e7 is not a thing. Next move, the pawn lands on e2. The pawn on b2 is threatened. The king is out of the action and cannot access any of these squares. So this is not a nice position to have to play. So probably rook e1, king d4, and you can, like this pawn is safe, but next move is black's next move is d2, and I am coming in. Like you can picture the ominous music that you want. Like this is bad news. So yeah, I was feeling pretty happy about this position in general, but perhaps this is still a draw. But like in general, this is, I think, the exact kind of stuff that white wants to avoid. Similarly, king f4. I can play bishop g5, and I am setting up a discover check. So he must be very careful. So for instance, this loses instantly. His only non-discovered check would be this. When this is probably black is only better but not winning, or which means probably the objective assessment is that this is a draw. White is taking a lot of pawns. But after king g5, I can play king e4 and rook e1 d3, and yeah, this is pretty nice. Rook c4, I can play something like this, and king e2, and somehow it feels like black has managed to create something out of nothing. So seeing all of this, my opponent played king f2, which I think was a very safe choice in practice. Perhaps now that I think about it after the game, I should have played bishop g5 and put the bishop on e3. But during the game I went king e4, which I think is a natural move. King e2, and I played bishop e5, and in order to get my rook activated like this. He played rook e7, which I think is a very precise move and probably the only move not to lose, but I have not checked with this with the computer, so I cannot know this for sure, but during the game it felt like rook e7 was extremely precise. Played this, and he played rook to a3, and here I spent a lot of time calculating rook h2 and d3, and it seemed that neither of them were absolutely winning. So let me show you a few lines. So d3, first of all, rook d3 is not possible. Rook h2, let's say king f1, king takes, rook takes here, rook takes b2. Let's say rook g5. I mean, this position is, I mean, we could stop and take stock at this point. But basically, I think black might actually be close to winning because of the precarious position of with the white king. So, for instance, rook e3. This might already be the only way to draw. Yeah. Because basically, if you take on a6, yeah, okay, there is still rook a3, so which is still a draw. So this might actually still be drawn, but yeah, during the game, I was not feeling confident about this for black. I mean, for white. Another typical line that might lose would be something like here, rook h2, and rook f4, attacking my king. And king f3 just simply threatens mate, so white has no time to capture anything, and he must do something like this, and white is probably losing this at this point. Another thing that I calculated was king e2, king f2, rook h2, king g1, d2, and after this, queens. And probably white is winning here. Black is winning here. There's no way to win the queen, and in most cases the rooks can be picked up with a few select checks. So the rooks have very few spots to hide, and white's queen is just marching in. So yeah. So I understood that if I play d3, the king, if the king runs to the king side, it is very likely suicide, like rook h2. Here d2 is probably already winning as well. Rook a4, king f5. Actually, instead of going forwards, you go backwards. And rook d7, d1 queen. And rook f7, bishop f6, rook a5, rook g6, and again take on h1 queens with check, and d2 and take the rook. So, and one last possibility was so let's say rook here and rook here and king f1, and let's say rook takes b2. Rook a5 threatens to take the bishop and to mate me, but actually, since the king is on the king side, I can play king f3, and taking this bishop is of absolutely no importance because black is mating. So, and because the pawn is on d3, this is the critical point. Because the pawn is on d3, rook back to a3 is not possible in order to check the king again. Like this is simply checkmate. And after king f3, nothing helps. Like rook here, rook here. This is just a miserable position, and the pawn is running. d2 and rook takes a2. at this point it is very clear that black is winning. All right. So if the king, so I understood that after d3, if the king runs to the king side, so here, but when deciding between rook h2 and d3, I understood that if the king runs to the king side after d3, white will lose, probably. And after rook h2, which was the other alternative, if the king runs to the king side, since I have not taken the time to play d3, this is a slower version. And probably king, something like sorry, what would be nice? Yes, this would be a nice variation to show. Sorry. In this position, I am definitely not sure that black is winning. In fact, I think this is a relatively easy draw because black's king is completely cut off, and the white's pawns are safe and cannot really be attacked. The pawn on a6 is dropping, and even white might be the one with winning chances and not black. After rook h2, the last thing is I might simply grab the pawn on b2 and after rook a5, threatening the pawn here, I might try for the checkmate, but simply the rook comes back, and it feels like there is no way to actually really make progress. For instance, king c1 is a very nice way. During the game I also had a look at so let's say, sorry, rook h2, king f1. I think this is the king side is a bit safer. I was not really able to figure this out during the game, but the king side is a bit safer because there is no d3, and so there is no mating attempt. In this position, the bishop is falling, and okay, so probably e1 is the safest square because if the king wants to actually come and mate, taking on e5 comes with check. So king e3, rook takes e5 is lights out. So so in this position, I saw rook b5 takes, and I don't know. Let's say I don't know what move exactly. Let's say rook b7, for instance. Bishop g3, check, king d1, and it seems very, very easy for black to lose that kind of position. This pawn is under control now, and yeah, this pawn is potentially running. So yeah, there might be actually some quite some winning chances. So in the game, I used up almost, I had 20 minutes in this position, and I used up almost all of them. In the end, I simply played d3 and went for the perpetual check. The king has no escape, right? Like, all of these squares are taken. So this is simply a perpetual check, and if the king runs to the king side, he's running serious risk, both on b2 and with the potential king f3, whenever the rook leaves the third rank. So we made a perpetual like this, and I lost the first game, but I drew the second one, and so I was not all too unhappy about having scored, not having scored. So I was pretty happy that I didn't lose both games with black. And in a way, both games seemed pretty similar in that in both cases I had a slightly worse endgame, or simply a worse endgame, and I had to try to hold it. And in one case I did manage, and in the other case I didn't. So yeah, so that was my double round. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you tomorrow for today's game. And so yeah, don't hesitate to leave a comment, to like, to subscribe, that kind of stuff.